1,600 years. That's quite something. Imagine an incredible discovery just hidden there in Tikal all this time.
It really is amazing. And this altar, it's not just, a piece of carved stone. It could really shift our understanding.
Of that whole relationship, right, between Tikal and Teotihuacan, that ancient power dynamic.
Exactly. So today, that's our mission. We're diving into this new find, this altar, and all the archaeology around it.
Trying to unpack that story, the influence, the conflict, the whole complex picture between these two ancient giants.
And we're starting at Tikal, that's in Guatemala today. A major Maya city. Goes back, 2,400 years?
Yeah, a long history, even before this altar. It wasn't some minor outpost.
Not at all. Tikal had its own dynasty, established around 100 A.D. It was a power in its own right.
And this altar found right near the city center.
Very close, yeah. Which tells you it was likely quite important.
Yeah.
And you've got this international team working on it. Brown University involved.
Shows how significant this is considered globally.
Definitely. There's a lot of interest in figuring out this period.
So the big question we're asking you, the listener, and ourselves is, what does this 1,600-year-old piece of stone really tell us?
About that connection, that sometimes tense relationship between Tikal and Teotihuacan, which was way over in central Mexico.
Hundreds of miles away, near modern Mexico City. So let's zoom in on the altar itself. What are we looking at?
Okay, so it dates to the late 300s AD. And visually, it's striking. 4 painted panels.
Still with color, red, black, yellow.
Remarkably vivid, yes. And they show a main figure, clearly someone important. Feathered headdress flanked by these, maybe shields or ceremonial items.
Okay, but you mentioned the face was the real giveaway.
That's where it gets really interesting. The almond-shaped eyes, this bar across the nose, the double ears.
Oh, wait, the specific details. They sound familiar.
Very. They strongly echo depictions of the storm god, a major deity from central Mexico, from Teotihuacan specifically.
And that's not typical Maya style for Tikal at this time.
Not really, no. It stands out, which led the researchers to think, well, maybe this wasn't made locally.
Which is a pretty big claim, finding something like this in the heart of Tikal. So they think it was made by someone from Teotihuacan.
Or at least someone trained there. The skill, the specific motifs.
Yeah.
It points to a highly trained artisan.
Someone familiar with Teotihuacan art, despite the distance, 630 miles?
Exactly. That distance just hammers home the level of connection, or maybe influence that existed.
Professor Stephen Houston called it an extraordinary period of turbulence at Tikal.
Yeah, he argues this altar shows that wealthy, influential people from Teotihuacan actually came to Tikal.
And built replicas of their own ritual places, like setting up shop.
Pretty much. He talks about a heavy imprint. Teotihuacan wasn't just a distant trading partner anymore.
Okay, so to get the full picture, we need to rewind a bit. What was the relationship like before this turbulence, before the late 300s?
Well, like we said, Tikal was established long before. A small city initially, around 850 BC, then growing into its own dynasty.
And the interaction with Teotihuacan started?
Maybe a couple of centuries before this altar. Probably began as trade, exchanging goods. Seemed casual, perhaps.
But Houston has that analogy about poking the beast.
Right. I like that one. The idea is Tikal, maybe getting a bit ambitious, caught Teotihuacan's eye.
And not necessarily in a good way?
Maybe not. It led to more attention, more scrutiny. And then, Houston says, the arrival of foreigners, people representing Teotihuacan.
And this wasn't just a diplomatic mission. The evidence points to something much more aggressive. A coup.
That's the term he used, yes. Back in the 60s, they found this broken stone monument, but the text was preserved.
And it described?
A conflict. It basically said that around AD 378, Teotihuacan essentially, decapitated a kingdom.
Wow. Removed the king.
Removed the Tikal king and put in their own guy. A quisling, Houston calls him. A puppet ruler.
Okay, so direct political takeover. And there's other evidence supporting this heavy Teotihuacan presence, something about LiDAR?
Yes. LiDAR technology, the remote sensing that sees through the jungle canopy, was a game changer.
What did it show?
It found a scaled-down replica of Teotihuacan's main citadel, just outside Tikal's core area.
A replica, hidden.
It was buried under what looked like natural hills. Suggests maybe an occupation force, or at least a very strong established presence. Surveillance, perhaps?
Leading up to this coup around 378 AD.
Exactly. Which brings us back to the altar. Professor Scherer, another researcher on the team.
Andrew Scherer, right.
Yes. He points out the timing. The altar was built right around the time of the coup.
Making it potentially a direct piece of evidence from that exact moment of upheaval?
Precisely. But it's not just the outside of the altar. What they found inside is also really telling.
Inside, they excavated within the altar structure itself.
They did, and they found burials. One was a child, buried in a seated position.
Okay. Is that unusual?
For Tikal at that time, yes, quite unusual, but guess where it was common?
Let me guess.
Teotihuacan.
Bingo. And there was also an adult burial with a dart point.
Green obsidian. And Scherer notes both the material, that specific green obsidian, and the design of the dart point are classic Teotihuacan.
So it's like they were bringing their specific materials, their burial customs, really planting their flag, culturally speaking.
It certainly looks that way. It's strong evidence for Teotihuacan personnel being directly involved with this structure in these rituals.
And then there's that point about what happened after. The fact that the Maya seem to have just buried the whole site, the altar, the buildings around it.
Yeah, that's super intriguing. Scherer highlights this. The Maya usually built right on top of older stuff, reused the space.
But not here.
Not here. It was deliberately buried and then just left alone. He described it almost like a memorial or even a radioactive zone.
Suggesting some pretty strong feelings about it. Maybe fear, maybe respect, maybe bad memories.
Complicated feelings, for sure. It tells you this wasn't just another building. It represented something profound, something maybe unsettling about their past with Teotihuacan.
It definitely paints a picture of a major disruptive event. But interestingly, the story doesn't end with Tikal being crushed. Houston suggests the long-term impact was different.
Right, it's almost counterintuitive. He proposes that while the coup was obviously a shock, it might have, in the long run, actually pushed Tikal towards becoming even more powerful.
How so?
Well, in the centuries that followed, Tikal rose to become this dominant force in the Maya world, a nearly unmatched dynasty, before its own decline way later, around 900 AD.
So this intense foreign intervention, this period of being potentially controlled, somehow set the stage for future greatness. That's fascinating.
It really is. And Houston even talks about a kind of nostalgia later on among the Maya.
Nostalgia for the time they were influenced or partly ruled by Teotihuacan.
Sort of. He suggests that even when Tikal itself was declining, they might have looked back almost wistfully at the era of Teotihuacan's great power and influence, as if that connection, however fraught, left a permanent mark.
It's complex. To help us grasp the motives, Houston draws a parallel with later history, doesn't he?
He does. He compares it to the Spanish arrival in the Americas, interacting with the Aztecs. An older story, really.
A powerful empire eyeing the resources of another region.
Exactly. Teotihuacan likely saw the Maya lands, Tikal included, as a source of wealth. Desirable things they didn't have back home.
Like what?
Oh, exotic stuff. Special feathers from tropical birds, highly valued jade, and of course, cacao chocolate.
The essentials.
Maybe. But basically, they saw the Maya world as a kind of land of milk and honey, ripe for the picking, perhaps.
A familiar story through history, sadly. And all this new insight comes from that study in antiquity, published just recently, April 8th, 2025.
Yeah, by Houston, Scherer, Edwin Román Ramirez, and their colleagues. Really solid work connecting all these archaeological dots.
So the key takeaway here seems to be that this altar provides really strong physical proof of this incredibly complex interaction. It wasn't just trade, it was influence, conflict, direct intervention.
A messy, multifaceted relationship between two ancient superpowers. And the altar is like a snapshot of a critical, turbulent moment.
Which leads to a final thought for you, our listener. Considering Tikal's later rise after this Teotihuacan intervention, what does that suggest?
About the unpredictable consequences of external influence. Can periods of intense disruption, even foreign domination sometimes, unintentionally, clear the path for future strength or transformation?
It's definitely something to chew on, how these ancient power plays, these moments of crisis and adaptation, might echo through history in ways we don't always expect.